Hi, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. We're here live on Tuesday, February the 26th at 6 p.m. or just about. So it's school vacation week. I know some people who are off sunning themselves in southern climes, and I hope other people are availing themselves of having their kids at home and doing some stuff. And I'd like to talk briefly about Winterfest very quickly. I mentioned it last week, but if you Google Winterfest Manchester, you'll come up with the list of things offered by the Office of Youth Services. Something drew my attention tomorrow. If you're around, or if you have kids around and you're in the city, there's actually let me go to Wednesday. So it says, "What's the scoop? Ice cream with Mayor Craig at Manchester City Hall." If you go to City Hall between the hours of 1 to 3 p.m. tomorrow, there's free ice cream at Mayor Craig's office. So, you get a chance to get free ice cream for the kids, and maybe you can take a moment to chat with the mayor. And if you feel that things in our schools need to be improved, then you could share that with her also. I think it would be great if our teachers were able to get a contract after all this time, and the other, not just teachers, but paraprofessionals and principals and secretaries and everybody and subs are all sitting there waiting for some crumbs to fall off the table. So that would be a good opportunity. The other things going on, like tonight, for instance, if I don't want you to leave just yet, but when this show finishes at 7 o'clock, at 7:30, there's a game on out at Southern New Hampshire University, and it's versus the Assumption men's basketball team, and it's free, and it's on over at the field house on 2500 North River Road. So, if they're young teenagers or tweens sitting around and they want to go and watch some good basketball, heading over to watch the Penmen tonight at 7:30. It's free entrance, and if you want to bring some money for a hot dog, you could do that too. But it's always a good time, and there's something that doesn't cost anything. There are numerous other opportunities on the Winterfest program. Amongst some of those tomorrow is, again, actually it's at Southern New Hampshire University, but it's from 10:30 a.m. until noon, and it's free swimming at the swimming pool there. Now, I think you may have to, passes are required, and you have to pick up the passes and the pool rules, etc., from the Office of Youth Services, and that's at 848 Elm Street. So you go to 848 Elm Street before the pool opens at 10:30. You get your free passes, and you can go and swim and bring the family and have a swim at Southern New Hampshire University. What a wonderful thing to do! We're going to get 2 to 4 inches of snow tomorrow night, I just found out. How nice would it be to be swimming around in a nice warm pool? The kids will love it, getting out of the house and having some fun. Amongst them, I won't go through the whole list, because you could, again, go to Winterfest in Manchester and Google that, and you'll find the list. But examples are, there's a bunch of things on at the Courier Gallery. Like on Thursday night, there's stuff on there tomorrow. But tomorrow night, it's a free night at the Courier Gallery. It's from 5 to 8 p.m. And you can go there, and it says, it says, and that's over at 150 Ash Street, of course. So there's lots of things to do there, and they've got some stuff going on. And again, the basketball tournament is on Thursday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. And that's on every day at Beach Street School, and it's free. So that's on Beach. The basketball tournament is on every day from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. So if you want, it's 3-on-3, and you can go there with 3 people and play, or with 2 friends and play, or you can just go and they'll put you in a team and you play 3-on-3 basketball, and that's during the day, every day. So there's a lot of other things going on. Usually there's stuff going on at McIntyre. I don't want to go through the whole list here, but I know that, for instance, tomorrow, if you go as far as Cannon Mountain, it's $20 for a lift pass for the day. So I guess my main point would be, if as a parent you're sitting around for those with younger kids, there's a bunch of things on at the West Side Library and at the there's like a Lego fair, amongst other things, on at the City Library, and there's reading lap time for little kids and creative time for older kids. And so, if you're sitting around at home in Manchester and the kids are driving up the walls, or maybe the kids are just need to get out and about, there's the city does a good job of putting on lots of events, and there are lots of private organisations have things on too, but. Again, Winterfest is the place to go. I want to go to one topic that I dealt with a lot over the last 2 weeks, and I just want to take a moment and leave it there today. But it has to do with the decision of the city to fund the new football or football ground for Trinity High School. I got a call from somebody and a message from another, people who wanted to know why sort of what was my problem with that, so to speak. And in honor of that, I just want to be very clear what my problem was. My First of all, I thought that the fact that the city was financing a $4.2 million bond for fields and a clubhouse and showers and bathrooms, etc., at this particular time, given the realities of our budget, was kind of tough. But I did say to the aldermen when I spoke to them, I spoke to many of them, that was a political decision for them, and that Trinity was coming with with the offer to pay for 60%, and so I could see how. I could see that they would have to look at that. So to be clear, my issue was it wasn't that I didn't want the young boys and girls, or the students, I guess they're older, they're teenagers, at Trinity to have a field. Somebody, I think very unkindly, described it as perhaps envy, and those things are easy to say. But the bottom line is, it was a lousy deal for the city. Now, it's gone ahead and it was voted on, and Alderman Sapienza continued to vote against it, and Alderman Stewart in Ward 2, he also voted against it. And other than that, it was a 12-2 vote. And my argument continues to be that it was a terrible deal for the city. And so, if the city is financing it and supplying the field, and it's being financed, the city's financing it 40% and Trinity 60%, then my argument was twofold. First of all, that a private entity shouldn't have ultimate control over the city fields. And I was at pains to point out that I thought that if Trinity was granted everything that it asked for when the principal there wrote to the city and suggested a plan to do this, I think that would have been that would have been fine, and that would have given Trinity complete, everything they wanted for all their teams, all their practices, and all their time. And have ensured that they would have that for the potentially 35-year length of the agreement, as under the previous agreement, which was a first they had since 2009, the right to use the field, like first dibs or priority usage, and that had worked and continued to work since 2009. And it just seemed that was my first problem, was the idea that the city would be locked out of the fields. A lot of squiggle words were used for that we'll work together and all that stuff, but the contract says that they control the fields. I had a problem with that. And then the second thing that I had a problem with was the revenue thing, and I thought that if it's a city-owned field and granting a private organisation 100% of the revenue out over 35 years was a bad thing. And in my conversations with the aldermen, and they would verify it if you asked them, I spoke to 12 of the 14 aldermen, in my conversations with the alderman, I made the point that an agreement could have been constructed that said until such time as, say, there was some profit that 100% of the revenue would stay with Trinity, but that as soon as the bond was paid, so in 15 years' time, there'll be no annual payment, and so for the 20 years after that, to give Trinity the right to have 100% of the revenue just seemed to be wrong. So I'm leaving it with that. It was always uncomfortable for me. I know the friends of mine who have children going there. I hope the fact was they misunderstood my stance. If they didn't, then it should be very plain that my objective here was to ensure that the city got a good deal and that we as taxpayers were protected. And it seems that all of a sudden, when it came to this matter, that the people's great concern with taxes in the city, they weren't so concerned about taxpayers anymore. So. Be that as it may, that's where it is. So moving on to, I was at there was at the Finance Committee, a subcommittee of the Board of School Committee. The Finance Committee met this past week, and I attended that meeting over at West High School at the new, where the school department is now based at in a part of West High School. I went there, and some of the members were missing. Sadly, John Avard was sick that night and sent his apologies. And I forget who the other member who couldn't make it there. So it was a small group, but it was a quorum. So it was the committee was chaired by school member Beaudry, and then. Also in attendance were school board member Gerard and school board member Ambrosi. So after some discussion, Mr. Francis, the financial controller for the district, presented a budget, and it made some very interesting reading. But sorry, let me go chronologically, because before the budget was presented, I'll get to that in a second, there were a couple of people, Mrs. Delaney, a parent from representing CHAMPS, the Music Association at Central, and Mr. Doyle, the head of the music department at Central High School, came before the Finance Committee with a proposal asking that uniforms for the Central High School band, that the city find the money to pay for new uniforms. And this is something that I talked about very briefly a few weeks ago. But what was interesting was that they put a proposal forward that uniforms be bought for Central this year, as that was the one most in need, and then that the following year that uniforms be bought for Memorial and or West, whichever was decided, and in the third year the other high schools. So all three high schools would get new uniforms over time. And they explained the rationale for why they would go in any particular order and why Central's was deserved to be first. What was interesting was that amount was $100,000. It turns out that the committee CHAMPS at Central did some costings, and it would require $100,000. That was $80,000. I think $80,000 to purchase the uniforms, and then $20,000 for maintenance and cleaning for all the uniforms in the city for all the schools, and then that would be repeated next year and the following year after that. The discussion ensued, and the issue came to be one of priority, and one of the revelations to me, and I ask you to pay attention to this, was that previously I told people on this show that the last time that uniforms were bought for the high schools in Manchester was 1995, and it turns out that was not really correct. It was the last time that somebody else paid for uniforms for the bands in Manchester. So at that meeting, we learned how long it is since the City of Manchester's taxpayers actually bought uniforms for the bands in the city of Manchester. And if you can believe it, so what happened was the uniforms were bought most recently for West High School in 1991. So close to 30 years ago. And then in 1995, both Memorial and Central got new uniforms bought and paid for by a philanthropic donor. So some person decided to put their hands in their pocket and they donated these uniforms. So the question then becomes, so when was the last time that the Manchester School District, on behalf of the taxpayers of Manchester, actually bought a uniform for the young people of Manchester to have for their music department? And I was floored by the answer. It was 1971. So don't spit out your spaghetti on your dinner if you're watching this live. Just think about that for a minute. The last time that the city of Manchester purchased uniforms for its bands was in 1971. So 29 and 19 gets you close to 50 years. It's 48 years. It's incredible that, and the kids who are marching around in those uniforms are in their, that's 50, they're in their late 60s, pushing 70 now. It's incredible. In all those years, the city has never bought a new uniform since the people who are now 65 to 70 or who are walking around Manchester played in those bands. Any of you who are at home, and sometimes you hear from people who no longer have kids in the school system, and they say, whatever arguments they make about, we were tough back then, or we had 300 in the classroom, or we had one piece of chalk and we broke it into 4 pieces, or whatever they might say. It is words fail me because I've used words like shameful, unconscionable, embarrassing. There aren't enough words in the English language to describe how ridiculous. I think I heard a word today about another matter, and it might apply here. Grotesque. I think it's grotesque that a city that has a modicum, a whit of pride in itself, any sense of pride, that such a city would stand over a system and be okay with a system that couldn't buy new band uniforms for their high schools in almost 50 years. I just leave it there. So the discussion became about the $100,000 required, and that number is derived from they got pricing for uniforms, and they need 200 uniforms, and the cost was $270 a uniform or something like that, and but that's what is proposed to buy now. For Central High School. And as a comparison, band uniforms run up to about $800 per uniform, because it involves, a jacket, there's a hat and a plume thing and whatever else, I don't know, epaulettes or something, whatever goes in a band uniform. For comparison purposes, the proposed new spend that the parents group at Central is proposing would be $265 per uniform. The new uniforms in Londonderry at the high school there, or in Derry at the high school there, we were told at that meeting, were $650. So we're going to buy uniforms between about a third to a half of the cost of uniforms elsewhere, which, by the way, as a taxpayer, I'm fine with. If that's what is needed and that's what we want, and that's what is sufficient and adequate, then I don't need $600 uniforms if we don't need them and our kids don't need them. What was the next piece of that? So there was a discussion ensued about, after we got over the shock of the 1971 number and the fact that 3 school board members, well, I was going to say weren't embarrassed by it. I think they were embarrassed by it, so maybe that wouldn't be fair. But I guess not to be surprised by it. because we've seen so much of this before when it comes to schools and playgrounds and yards and books and textbooks and facilities and all the other list of things. So things like we didn't buy a new one in the last 50 years shouldn't be that surprising. I've had kids come home from school with books that go back 30 years. I know that when I was at Hillside Middle School, that the librarian told me there that the last time new books were bought for the school was 18 years earlier. Think about that. 18 years without new library books. And we made a big deal because we actually bought some new textbooks about 5 or 6 years ago now, but we bonded the money to do it. We couldn't even buy them out of the budget. We had to borrow money to do it. So we're still paying for those. So now the discussion became about Dr. Vargas, who was asked whether how he felt about adding this to the budget, because the Finance Committee, if they approved it, then it would go forward for to be included in the budget, to be discussed at the Board of School Committee before a final budget was agreed. And Dr. Vargas was hesitant to agree to it, and his point was not at all that we didn't need uniforms. His point wasn't that he wasn't embarrassed that the so-called great city of Manchester hadn't bought new school uniforms in 48 years, new band uniforms in 48 years. Sidebar here. This is the city that just broke ground on the new True by Hilton Hotel today with great pride. The city where Army is going on with Dean Kamen in the mills. The city that is thriving and has so many great things going on. We've got Stay Work Play and In Town Manchester, and we're celebrating all that is glorious and good about our city, while our city schools sit there, slumped. The contrast couldn't be sharper. So, Dr. Vargas says, I just cannot say go ahead with $100,000 to spend on uniforms. Now, the budget, by the way, is $172 million from all sources, not just from city taxpayers, but from all sources. The school district budget is $172 million. But the $100,000 for band uniforms, he couldn't justify it because he said it wasn't that he didn't agree with it. It wasn't that he didn't think they were needed, because they are and badly needed, but that we need so many other things before it, that the list is so great. That should be shocking to all of us right there. We were told that $40 million worth of repairs, or $31 million was one number I heard, and then at another meeting I heard almost $40 million. So whether it's 31 or almost $40 million is on the list of repairs to our facilities that are waiting there to be done with no money to do them. And these repairs are not, put glittering new paint and shine everything up and make it look like new. These are repairs that are needed and have been sitting there. And there's no money there to do that either. So, when the parents at Southside painted the middle school there a couple of years ago, the parents at Hillside painted the Hillside Middle School. I know when Hillside was repainted, it was the first time that the school had been painted. That was the gym and the lobby areas and cafeterias, some areas like that were painted. Paid for by the PTO, work done by parents and students during the summertime. It was the first time the school had been painted since it was built in 1968. So, we can go round and round about the city of Manchester and what its priorities are, but there is no argument, I think, you can make that the city prioritizes its schools. And so, if you end up going to Mayor Craig's office tomorrow for the scoop of ice cream, or the ice scoop, whatever it's called, which I think is a great thing. What's the scoop? I commend Mayor Craig for this. This is not I'm not dumping on Mayor Craig. I commend her. It's great, and an opportunity for kids to go and visit the city hall and get an ice cream. But if you go there and you bring your kids, then I think that pointing out that our schools need to be properly funded should be on the tip of your tongue. There's lots of, if you need ammunition, so to speak, there's loads of ammunition. The situation is pretty obvious. We have, if I could see, just as a sidebar here again, I meant to mention this. I meant to mention this young lady in last week at West High School. There was a piece in the Union Leader, and it's on the Manchester School District website also, that West High School student chosen for $25,000 scholarship. So let me see. So Lily Rousseau, Manchester High School West student, is among 106 recipients of the prestigious 2008 Horatio Alger National Scholarship. You can read the Union Leader. The link that was on the city's website is broken if anybody's paying attention over there. But congratulations to Lily Rousseau for getting this national scholarship and being one of 106 students around the country to receive it. We continue to see our kids doing great, and that's a credit to first of all to the kids, and then to their families and parents, but also to our school district and the teachers who teach them and help them with to achieve these awards. So we can go on and talk about the great things that are happening in our schools, but that should lead us to the point of saying we need to do more for our students, because they're out there and they're working hard, or many of them are working hard to achieve despite the challenges, and we ought to be supporting them and not arguing against them, etc. So back to the city's budget, which is on the Union Leader, if you're interested, but. And so the tax cap budget for 2020, which is not approved yet, this is the what the budget would be. The tax cap budget would come in at 172,226,000, blah blah blah, which is a 2.3% increase over the previous year's budget, because that's what inflation, or the CPI number, is. As many of you will know, the tax cap in Manchester is based on the previous year's consumer price index. So, and as part of that, and that number though, district administrators said they're expecting at $500,000 less in state aid in the stabilization grant, and then there's $250,000 down due to decreasing enrollment, especially from surrounding towns. So the $500,000, for instance, in the continuing pass down of costs from the state of New Hampshire. It's important, ladies and gentlemen, that people contact their state reps and tell them that the continued elimination of adequacy grants and the money that it's costing Manchester every year is just isn't right, and shouldn't be happening, and people should vote against it. And frankly, I think any state representative from the city of Manchester who goes up to Concord, who votes to continue this practice of passing the costs down to the taxpayers of Manchester, ought to be voted out of office. I think there's no excuse for it. All it is destruction and damage and pain caused to the city of Manchester in the name of so-called fiscal rectitude. It is inexcusable. The state of New Hampshire should honour its commitments and pay its bills. And we send people up to Concord in order to develop a budget to pay for the costs, the various costs in the city. And this is one of them. Let me grab a caller here on line one. Good afternoon, caller. Welcome. Hello.
Hi there, Jim. It's Sandy Paradise.
Hi,
I
Sandy.
just wanted to mention I was on the school board when we tried to get those uniforms in 1995. I went on in 1989, and I was on 6 different committees. And boy, we really had to fight to get uniforms. Those Central uniforms had more holes in them. It was pathetic. And anyway, we did get them, and as you say, the city has not bought uniforms for many, many years. And then I want to mention something else. I was head of the athletic committee, and we had kids in 77 and 78. My son was on a cross-country team, and we won the city, state, and New England up in Vermont. We went to the Nationals. We were so embarrassed by our uniforms. They were supposed to be red and white. They were pink. So we managed to get new uniforms for the cross-country teams on the athletics back then, too. But,
Right.
I mean, it's like it took 22 years to get the Memorial Field down there.
Right.
22 years. That's
Right.
pathetic.
Right.
Our kids were running track and they had cinders in their knees. We were the only track team out of Portsmouth and Dover, or wherever, even up north, that didn't have a good field. And we had good kids. We had good runners. We had good cross-country and track and everything. It was horrible. It was horrible. I'll tell you, the first 6 or 7 years I was on there, it was really bad. And then we managed to get the booster clubs to help us out. We did get booster clubs. Memorial had a very good booster club going. We did not have a musical booster club as they have, but my daughter was president of chorus, and it was pretty pathetic with some of the, actually some of the instruments too.
Right.
Anyhow, we had said way back then that every 10 years they ought to check. Every 10 years they ought to check out the uniforms, make sure, things are okay, this and that and everything. Of course, nothing is done every 10 years in Manchester.
Right.
Sorry to say, in Nashua, they are.
Right.
They are. Their councilmen and their school boards and everything there. I've been there. I've worked for the mayor there, Mr. Donchus, and in the past, not this time, but in the past, I've watched what they do. They get together, and if they make a 10-year plan, they stick to that 10-year plan. But there's only one more thing I want to say.
Okay.
I watched the administration committee the other day for the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, and the only one that didn't want to put the tax cap on the ballot was Joe Lavasser. And Tony Sapienza is the head of that administration. Everyone else voted Willie Shea and Willie Stewart. And Mr. Kavanaugh brought up that a businessman came to him and said it was embarrassing for him to know that we had not such terrible maintenance on everything in Manchester. The maintenance
Right.
on all different kinds of buildings and streets and so on. Everything was so bad. I didn't quite get anything about schools because I put it on late.
Right.
But that was February 18th or 19th, I believe. And I happened to put it on before you came on. So, I hate to say it. I get so upset. I don't have any children in the school systems. I did have, my last one is 21 now. She went to Central. And Matthew Paradise, he went to Central. He's 23. And they get a good education at Central. They have some problems. So Laura has some problems, my granddaughter.
Mm-hmm.
She was a little tiny thing and had some problems. But thank God they had resource officers.
Right.
And Matthew, he had to just stand up to people. But of course, I graduated in 1955 from Central. So Central's always, I still get Central T-shirts. But, you're right. You're so right on everything. We let everything go so long.
All right.
We do anything about it.
Well, Sandy, thank you for
I'll
calling.
I think we have to get together if we're going to put. And then Joe Lavasser brought up, in another year, we're gonna do something with the what do they call it there? The charter. So we don't have to bother about that. But then Norman said, no, it's 2023.
Right.
Is the charter.
Okay, well, I'm going to get on to that. But Sandy, thank you for calling in. I'm going to let you go. I appreciate your points, and thank you for your service to the city.
Yeah, so I was just trying to bring up a few points.
Yeah, I got it.
You were so right. You were so correct.
All right.
And that Trinity deal is not a good deal. I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
The wealthy people are sending their children to Derryfield. The wealthy people that I know are paying $27,000, and they're sending their people to Derryfield. They're not sending them to Trinity, and only 52 or 53% of Manchester kids are going to Trinity.
Yeah, so to be precise...
I wouldn't doubt if Trinity lasts 5 to 10 years. I may not be here. I'm 81 years old, Joe. Jim.
Right.
But anyway...
Hopefully you will be.
Thank you for your program. Thank you for going to the meetings. And I appreciate everything that you do and you say and everything, and maybe it'll get knocked into their heads one of these days.
All right, Sandy. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. What a great lady, and someone who was around will remember. And she says she still has T-shirts at home, and maybe they're the T-shirts they're still wearing around the place. Again, at the risk of drawing people's ire, I have kids. I've had kids play sports in Manchester School District, and all my kids played sports. And I still have one child who continues to play sports in the city of Manchester, and we've advocated for things for sports teams in the past as well. So, we've had very generous donations from private companies who have donated uniforms and track gear, etc., for our teams, and kudos to them. And it's great, and that's one of the great things about Manchester, to show that there are private individuals who will stand up and do something. Our problem is with our political leaders and the small but loud group of taxpayers in the city who simply do not value public education and will not and will not fund it properly. The tax cap issue, it has to go before the full board. The Committee on Administration passed it on to the full board to be decided, and the tax cap, it will be decided by the people, not by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. So all the Board of Mayor and Aldermen can do, when Ms. Paradise talks about Bill Shea and Mr. Kavanagh and others voting in favour of putting it on sending it up to the board, first of all, that should be an easy vote. Just send it to the board for discussion, and then the board gets to decide whether to put it on the ballot or not. And it would seem to me allowing the people to decide is the most democratic thing one could do. So I don't understand standing in the way of putting it on the tax cap. There's a lot of other things going on. The uniform things, the budget. Just a couple of other numbers off the budget here. So the budget calls for positions to be reallocated. So and that's because. There isn't enough money in the budget as proposed, and there's another $500,000 coming out from the state, etc. So the idea under the proposal, that's just a proposal right now, coming from the school board side, before the Board of Mayor and Aldermen get their hands on it. The proposal is to eliminate 12.5 positions at our high schools. Now, they'll be lost through attrition. In other words, it's people who are leaving who won't be replaced. So if you've got a kid at MST or at Memorial or Central or West right now, or if they're going in there in their freshman year, there'll be 12 and a half less teachers in those schools under this proposal starting in September. So, and this will be the multiple year. This is multiple years when these cuts have been made. Now, also something to take care of here, to look at here, is that there will be, however, additions because of a reallocation. So the 12 and a half positions lost at the middle schools are people who are retiring or who are leaving to go elsewhere, and they won't be replaced. At least 12 and a half of them won't. There will be 7.5 positions added to the elementary school, and that's very important because we're going on. There has been a process since Dr. Vargas came to town of trying to reduce the massive class sizes. The largest classes in the state of New Hampshire are in the city of Manchester. Let's not forget it. We have the largest class sizes in the state, as well as we spend less than everybody else per student. To say it again. So 7.5 positions added to our elementary schools, and then there'll be 17.5 positions added at the middle school level. Now, just a word of caution about the 17.5 positions being added at the middle school. That would be wonderful and generous if that were a net increase. However, it's not a net increase. You're going to see what is happening, of course, is on the west side of the city, 5th grade will no longer be 5th grade starting in September. 5th grade won't be at Highland Goffs Falls or Parker Varney or no, maybe not Highland. So Goslar, Northwest, and Parker Varney, I guess. On the west side, they will lose 5th grade, and 5th grade will be going into Parkside. And currently, Parkside is being reconfigured and will be this summer in preparation for accepting the 5th grade. And so, effectively, what you're seeing is because the 5th grade is coming, and there are multiple classes, and 5th grade isn't one class in a school like Northwest. There could be 3 or 4 classes of 5th grade, each with 25 to 29 or 30 kids in it, maybe more. And when one of the teachers is out sick or missing, then the balance gets spread across them, so they're all nicely around 40. But let's not be too unfair about that. We are reducing the numbers over the last couple of years, and that is very commendable. But so when it says that we're getting 17.5 new positions being added at middle school, most of that actually is the addition of teachers from the grade school side who are moving with their students into 5th grade, and where 5th grade will now be at Parkside. And of course, we're going to see this repeated on the east side of this, on the remainder of the city in the following year, when or whenever budget allows, etc. But my understanding is that will happen the following year. Another figure that jumped off the page here is that where are we? The level of reductions. So the school district has had 16.8% over the past decade. We've had a loss of students, a lowering of numbers of 16.8%. And in response to that, we have, I don't see the figure here, I think it's 12.5% or 12% reduction. Sorry, 11.6% reduction in teachers, social workers, librarians, counsellors, etc. The number of students attending charter schools and being homeschooled is now 726 students, or about 9% of the city's total population. Of the 31 charter schools in the state of New Hampshire, 6 of them are here in Manchester. And I can't but state that they span the spectrum of good to atrocious, and atrocious is atrocious. So, but no one's watching that ship. So, let it be as it may. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the tax cap. We'll know after the next school board meeting, I believe. But the budget's going to go to the board, to the school board. The school board will prepare a budget to send to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. An effort was made at the Finance Committee to have only a tax cap budget once again sent to the school board, so that gets repeated there, and then only a tax cap budget gets sent to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. For a decade, I've been repeating ad nauseum the fact that what should be happening is the school board should develop a budget for what it actually needs to educate the kids. Not the wants and wishes and all the lovely things they'd like to have, but the actual what the needs and wants, what they actually have to have, what it requires to educate the children of the city of Manchester. That budget almost firewalled off from the number of tax cap, no tax cap, whether it's got a tax cap or not. Let the number come in and save the taxpayers $5 million if it ever gets to the point where we don't need that money. But the first thing we should do is look to what our needs are, and then decide on a budget. But that's never done, and it's never done because it saves the embarrassment of members of the school board first, and then members of the aldermanic board. They're saved the embarrassment of having to say, no, we won't reduce the class sizes from 30 at the middle schools. No, we won't reduce the class sizes from 30 at the elementary schools. By the way, Miss Paradise talked about the condition of the track at Memorial, and she's talking about many years ago, because the track at Memorial is no longer fit for purpose, and that ought to be replaced. And the fields next to Southside and Memorial also need to be fixed, and there's no money there for that also. So the budget that goes forward to the board, mayor and alderman ought to be the budget for the actual cost of running the school system in the city, and then let the tough guys and women make the tough decisions. Just, I've only ever asked for people to be honest about it and say, this is what we're doing. And if people feel strongly about the tax cap, or we just can't afford anymore, this is the best we can do, then they need to just sit in front of the taxpayers of the city and man up about it. And say, I'm voting against your kids getting new textbooks. I'm voting against them getting new uniforms. I'm voting against fixing the leaking roof. I'm voting against them getting, and just say, and be man about it and say, look, I'm making the argument, we just can't afford it. And I'm sorry that that your kids don't have the things that other kids have in other cities, but I, as your alderman, am voting against it. I think I'm doing the right thing on your behalf, that you don't want to spend it too. And lo and behold, if you did that, you might find out that your constituents, if you were an alderman, might say to you, no, that's not what we want you to do. People all over this state all the time go to town meetings, and things are proposed. And sometimes people get a big shock when the local residents say, no, I don't want my children in the elementary school with the bathrooms leaking sewage. I want the bathrooms fixed. Or, the fire truck is 27 years old and it breaks down 5 times a year, and I really want us to buy the new fire truck, and I'm willing to pay. It happens all the time. But in the city of Manchester, we have a small group of political leaders who basically, in my view, not wanting to attack them, however tempting it might be, but they lack political courage. And they hide behind easy slogans. They don't have to show the kids the photograph of the kids without the services standing behind them, and they're able to say, I held the line. And what I'd like to do is hold a searchlight, a magnifying glass on the conditions of the kids and what is happening behind that statement. Because I know it sounds emotive. I've often used the analogy because I think people understand it. Most people are familiar with Charles Dickens and his novel Oliver Twist, or they've seen the movie Oliver, or they've gone to the play. And that iconic scene where Oliver goes up and he's in the poorhouse and he has the bowl of gruel, this soup that's got very little sustenance in it, and he asks for more. And the guy says, more, and, clips him around the ear for having asked for more. And if in that reflected a sort of Victorian view of poverty and poorhouses, and people who went to church on Sundays and were very respectable and dressed very nicely and walked the streets of London at the time and ran their banks and their big businesses, etc., were convinced of the moral rectitude, the morality of having people who were in debt in debtors' prisons and in poorhouses, and that orphan kids and kids without anyone to be looked after, this is how they would be treated. And they were fine with them sleeping on threadbare boards, blankets on boards, and being served gruel. And they were doing all that in the name of, this is what we, the people of London, could afford. Now let's get in our carriage and go down to the Ritz and have a couple of more shrimp cocktails and a couple of glasses of brandy. And so there's no difference in my mind between that and what we do today, when we have the same type of thing happening where, nobody wants to go in the poorhouse with the camera and show what's actually happening in the poorhouse. And the same is true of politicians not all of them, but politicians in Manchester who are happy to vote down funding for our schools and for our school children, and they don't want to be held account to it, and they don't want the bright light shone on it. And what I think I do in a very modest way is I don't have much of a spotlight. Maybe I've got like a 15-watt bulb, but whatever I have, I'm pointing the little bit of light I have in the direction of where the problems are, and trying to hold people to account. And when they make terrible decisions on behalf of the taxpayers, and when their priorities are all out of whack, then I'm trying to get them to respond and do the right thing. I said to our previous mayor, Mayor Gatsis, on a number of occasions, and this is not to belie Mayor Gatsis, because as I've now said many times, he just happened to be the mayor. There were 14 people ably assisting him. He could make no decision on his own. It took a board of mayor and aldermen, or a board, to assist the mayor in making the decision. So this is not to take cheap shots at Mayor Gatsis. But I did say to him about the whole idea of that there were certain, there were things that we would never touch in our budget because of the reaction we would get from people. And to give you an example of this, we get it right out of the band uniform thing. Band and music in the city of Manchester is actually a curriculum item, despite what some people would like to do and remove it from adequacy as an offering, which is another day's work. But it actually, kids do it for credit. It's a subject, and it's included in the curriculum. Sports are not, by the way. So physical education is, but sports are not. But we always fund. If the football team needs new helmets, they get new helmets. A new helmet for a football player costs the same amount as a uniform for a band player. But because the people in our body politic are afraid of the reaction of the people of Manchester if the kids were running around in helmets that were terrible or looked like they were from the 1960s, like something you'd see on an old black and white newsreel, they'd be embarrassed by that. So the money's always pointed up for that. And what I did say, when I go back to Mayor Gatsis, I said to Mayor Gatsis at one point when we were firing 160 teachers, and some people argue about firing. They say if you say firing, it means they were eliminated for cause. I use firing as a sort of pejorative term. So it's that they were eliminated callously, coldly, without thought, or actually with lots of forethought, but thoughtlessly. My point was, you've decided to make the cuts there. What you won't do is, the more honourable thing might be to put a padlock on Gill Stadium and on Memorial Field and at West High School. Put padlocks on the fields. Turn off the lighting and put signs on it. By order of the Mayor of Manchester and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, there'll be no more games played in these fields because we can't afford it. And you won't do that. And the reason why you won't do that is the same reason why you will fund a field for a private enterprise for $4.2 million and build bathrooms for them. It's the same thing. You'll do it or you won't do it based on the reaction of the people. So if the average person in the city of Manchester were to stand up and have their voices be heard, this can be undone. Because in the end, these people, no matter how self-serving they may be, in the end, they will respond to the wishes of the people, because the people are the final arbiters. The people have a vote. The people get to throw them out in their ears if they're not doing the things that they ought to be doing. But our aldermen know that many of you don't show up to vote, or others sort of are in despair or are in apathy or somewhere in the spectrum between those two, and just accept what's going on and say, there's no more we can do about this. As we come closer to the end of our program, I just want to I'd like to point out that we had an announcement today with regard to the teachers' contract, which has been going on and on and on now, and it looks, and the teachers' union has asked to go to mediation or arbitration. And so now this is going to, we'd had some hopeful signs, but now it looks like that we're going to go to arbitration. Now, in the end, they're going to appoint a mediator, and the mediator will just be a sort of trier of facts and look at both positions and see what is a legitimate claim and what is not. But the sad part about it is it's going to put it all back, and so it's going to make it difficult on the budget side because the budget is being drawn up right now. But it to me it's I don't mean dishonest in the worst sense that people are. But generally it's a dishonest discussion when if I'm trying to reach agreement with you to lease your property, and yet I have no money to give you. And we're here debating or more accurately, let's say what the new lease term should be for the next 3 years. But going into the room, I tell you that, I don't have an extra dime to pay you for your property, but I just want to keep it for the same money for the next 3 years. And you're already getting well below the market rate for it. And somehow we're having this pretend discussion. And we're going to talk about, well, what about the maintenance of the apartment, and what about if we, took out the refrigerator and put in a smaller refrigerator? But the bottom line is I don't have a dime. And this is the place where we find our school board and board of mayor and aldermen in with regard to these contracts for teachers and principals and staff and support staff and everybody else, and secretaries. Is was no money put in the budget last year, so therefore you can talk about whatever you want. There is no money to pay any increase. So when I say the word that's what I mean by it's a dishonest conversation. Lastly, I'd like to say this. There was a piece, Mr. Capano, Chief Capano, the Capuano, the Chief of Police, has been on talking about changing this incentive days thing, which has been going on now for more than a decade in the city of Manchester, where large incentives were being paid out to police officers over recent years without the knowledge seemingly or approval of the board of mayor and aldermen. And so he's come back with a proposal, as I read today, that it would be 12 officers would receive an incentive of some kind each year, or 12 of them would be given out, no more than 12 for people for, particularly, for showing up for all shifts or something, or doing something particularly brave, etc. That's all very commendable. But then I think that the one group in the city, the teachers in the city and the associated groups in our schools, have no such opportunity. They can't serve overtime. There's no time and a half. There's no hazard pay. And it would be nice if you're going to implement an incentive program for the one department in the city, perhaps there should be an incentive program for all of them. That would be much fairer to everybody involved. So I'll leave you with that, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for spending an hour with me. Go out and have fun with your kids this week. It's winter vacation, and we'll see you all again next Tuesday night at 6 p.m. Thank you from Jim O'Connell. Good night.